Jim, good morning, buddy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, folks. Good to have you all here. The best part of the day. I'm an early morning person, so this is the time that I think most of the work gets done. But thank you all so much for coming out today. Love the opportunity to express with you some of the things that we see, some of the challenges that we face, and how we believe that we can address those challenges. Let me begin by saying this. The threat of our lifetime is the Chinese Communist Party, period. No two ways about it. Our efforts have to be to make sure that we have the capability and the capacity to address that threat. And let's not underestimate what challenge that's going to be. Because as we've watched the Chinese here in the last 5 years, they have tripled what they publicly say that they are doing to fund their defense infrastructure. What we have to be able to do is to do the proper things to build that capacity and capability here. And where we are going to succeed strategically against the Chinese is to make sure that we get more per our dollar than the Chinese get per their yuan. And we can do that, folks. We are the best innovators and creators in the world. But it will take an all-hands-on-deck mentality to make sure that we get that done, because do not underestimate what it will take to make that happen. I want to make sure that we are, along with you, charting that path. How do we make sure that we get to that point where we say, okay, today, and this needs to be a daily metric, every day, everyone from Congress to the Pentagon to the industry needs to ask, what can we do today with the all-hands-on-deck mentality to make sure that today, when Xi Jinping wakes up, he says, no, not today. That's really what this is all about. And it is that sort of issue. We can project and say, well, maybe it's a year or 2 years or 5 years, the Davidson window, talk about all those things. Those things don't make any difference if we don't take on this challenge on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour, day-by-day mindset, because that's what it's going to take. It really is, I think, as I said, the challenge of our lifetime. And I believe that we can do it. I want to make sure, too, that as we look at the idea of the capacity and capability that we need today and also modernizing, that we assure that we are keeping in mind how we get that done. Listen, we can all look at legacy platforms and say, well, there's something out there that's better, something that has, more reach, more lethality, more range. But what I want to make sure that we do is we look at retiring legacy platforms and modernizing is that curve of retirement as we are retiring those legacy platforms and those platforms go out of the inventory. I want to make sure that the curve that we have in investing and bringing new capability and capacity into the inventory, I want to make sure that those curves cross. Because today what we hear from the Pentagon is this divest to invest strategy. And folks, that strategy will be a failed strategy because it doesn't provide us a transition through this time of significant challenge. I want to make sure that these curves intersect. And I have no reservations to say some of this stuff as goes out, it may not be a level transition, but we want to make sure that those curves intersect. Because we can't have the gaps there that we see are being proposed. The proposals coming out is say, well, let's divest in all these legacy platforms, and then outside the fight up is when all these new platforms come into existence. And folks, we all know that all of our dreams come true outside the fit up. So I want to make sure that that's not how this occurs. And it's up to Congress, too, to make sure that we do our part. So I don't want to say that it's all the Pentagon's fault or it's all fault in any one single place. Congress has to be part of making sure that there is certainty on this path. And how do we do that? We stop this ridiculous practice of continuing resolutions. If we're going to make sure that we have continuity and direction in the Pentagon, if we're going to make sure that we have a vision on how we move from legacy platforms to modernization, new capability, new capacity, if we're going to make sure that the industry is there with us, if we're going to make sure, too, that we are attracting private investment to develop this technology, then Congress needs to do its job and to do it on time. Now, I don't underestimate how incredibly difficult that will be this year. In a very narrowly divided House, getting 218 votes is going to be a challenge. No two ways about it. I'm an optimist, though. I believe that it can be done, and I believe that it has to be done. I know many members there, like myself, are on track to make sure that we, along with leadership, make sure that those things happen. Let me talk a little bit, too, about what we have to do as far as the total resourcing. You know, we look at this year's appropriation. We saw the president's budget come over. I think it doesn't do what's necessary. It doesn't even keep up with inflation. We, at the very least, have to take last year's number and keep up with inflation. Because if we don't, we're going to see our efforts backslide, and we do not want to do that. Another thing we have to do, too, is we have to make sure we're doing everything to enable private dollars to come into the formula as far as research, development, technology, engineering, to make sure that those dollars are there. You know, if you looked years ago, in fact, about 40 years ago, the investment from the private sector and the investment from the government in research and development and technology and engineering was about 50-50. Today, folks, it's about close to $520 billion from the private sector and about $140 billion from the public sector. Incredible imbalance. So what we want to make sure we do is to attract the efforts so that the government is sending the demand signal. I want to make sure that we are giving a clear direction as to where dollars need to come and where they need to go. Now, the Office of Strategic Capital, I think, is a good first step. I think more has to be done. I think, too, that there are some requirements in the SBIR regulations, especially for phase 3, that say if you have more than 50% venture capital dollars, the U.S. government's not going to be involved. Why would we want to walk away from technology where the private sector said, hey, listen, we're willing to take a risk here? In fact, as we know, venture capital is where the biggest risks are taken. Why would we want to walk away and say, no, gosh, if there's somebody that's willing to place private dollars there, the government needs to walk away? No. We need to rescind that. We also need to put the Defense Innovation Unit back under the Secretary of Defense to make sure it's at the necessary level of priority. If we are going to get done the things that we need to get done, we have to leverage both public and private capital to the maximum extent possible in order to advance technologies, in order to make sure, too, we have proper investments to scale. I want to make sure that we're able to scale these technologies. There's a lot of great stuff out there, a lot of great things that are in phase 1 and phase 2 elements. Sometimes those ideas, though, never graduate or never scale to the proper level. I want to make sure that the Department of Defense is using, to the maximum extent possible, other transaction authorities. You know, there are new technologies out there that can really advance if you use those other transaction authorities. There doesn't necessarily have to be a requirement there. For those companies that are trying to cross the valley of death, I want to make sure that they are very adept at using the mid-tier authorizations. Those are all tools that are there. We have to be able to use them. I've been working with the chairman of our full committee, Mike Rogers, and the chairman of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, Ken Calvert, to look at innovative ways about how we can attract private capital into this sphere to make sure that the necessary investments are being made, both publicly and privately, to assure that we have the proper path forward. Folks, I am very bullish on what we can do, but again, in the words of the immortal Jerry Reed, we have a long ways to go and a short time to get there. I want to make sure that everybody is on board with this. I want to make sure, too, that the thoughts and ideas that you have make their way to us, because we don't have a claim on all the great ideas about what we need to do to chart the path forward. I am confident that we will be able to meet this challenge. I'm confident, too, with the things that are happening in Ukraine that obviously are impacting the things that we're doing are, I believe, ending up in the right realm of where they need to be. But when we're talking about munitions, magazine depth, all those elements of things that we haven't paid attention to for years, and now we're trying to get back in the business. You know, it's one thing to have that magazine depth during peacetime. It's another thing to now develop it and to, at the same time, do modernization. All those things have to be done. And I'll mention a little bit of that. I'm sure some questions will be in that realm, but it's not just munitions and building or rebuilding magazine depth, but it's also modernizing weapon systems, especially things like energetics, propellants, explosives. we are far behind where our competitors are in what they do in research and development and application of more modernized energetics. We have to do those things. We have to be able to look in every corner of every element of technology and make sure that we are providing the tools necessary to have that strategic overmatch. And I can tell you through the years, we have been focused on CT and CI, and listen, necessarily so in many cases, but we have allowed our conventional capabilities to stay stagnant and in some instances atrophy, and our adversaries have taken advantage of that. So I want to make sure that we have the direction going in the proper realm to make these things happen. And I appreciate what each and every one of you in this room do. And Jim, I am ready to take questions or comments or whatever to reflect maybe a little bit more on some of these issues. But
sir, we've got 5 minutes. So
okay.
Go for it, sir.
Sounds good.
Congressman Al Schaefer,
Yes.
I'd like to throw out the first question.
Yes.
By the way, very, very good talk.
Thanks.
Set some very clear priorities. You didn't talk much about the state of the industrial base. So you talked a little bit about it with munitions, and we are finding out some things. What is your view about government propping up the defense industrial base?
Well, listen, we have to make sure that we send a clear demand signal. And what's happened through the years is the demand signal has been all over the place, and you cannot expect the industrial base to grow or to even stay at a constant level if the government's up and down on the roller coaster. And one of the reasons that happens is CRs. If you're a small business that's a supplier to a shipbuilder or an aircraft manufacturer, and you say, wait a minute, this year I got an order for 24 of these systems, and next year I get an order for 0, at some point you go, I'm out of the government business. I can't run my business like this. I can't be on the roller coaster ride. I can't see my capital providing a return on investment. So people go elsewhere. A great example is in the shipbuilding industry. If you look, it's been approximately 30 years ago. If you look there were almost 35,000 suppliers for shipbuilding. Today, as we speak, it's right around 3,000. So we see what's happened when the industrial base is atrophied. And in many places, there's a single provider for a critical ship system or ship part. And that goes the same for aircraft and others. So you have a critical single point of failure. What we have to do is to be able to help make investments to modernize the industrial base, to use newer technologies there. Listen, the thing that excites me are things like additive manufacturing, things we can do today with compounds like tungsten. I was as an aircraft manufacturer the other day, and they're doing additive manufacturing, digital printing of parts for aircraft. And they take that part, they cast it essentially with a digital printer, and then they go ahead and machine it. That's incredible. I mean, that's the sort of thing that the private industry brings there. But people are not going to make that investment unless we send a clear demand signal, and they look at it in the long term.
Thank you, Congressman.
Sure.
I will make one editorial comment.
Yes.
Thank you to Congress for authorizing multi-year procurement
Yes.
for munitions.
Yeah,
That's helped more than anything else I know.
that's a great comment. Multi-year procurement provides, again, that certainty. I want to make sure, too, and it provides scale. It provides scale. So, a great example is 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, we bought 2 aircraft carriers. We used to buy them 2 at a time. When we bought those 2 aircraft carriers, we saved over $3 billion by doing that. So you're right, we have to buy multiples, and we have to make sure that there's long-term multi-platform procurement. Yes.
Congressman Rob Spingarn, McAleese Research.
Yes.
High-level question on the budget.
Yes.
We have a fiscal 24 request. Obviously, we have competing demands. We need more money. We have slower growth in the 24 budget. So do you expect it to get plus up? And what about this Freedom Caucus looking for a 10% cut?
Yeah. Listen, I believe that we have to take last year's number and at the very least have a factor of inflation, which is around 6%. As you know, the PB that came over doesn't reflect that. I think that that's where we need to be. I believe the majority of members of Congress believe that that's where we need to be. If the members of the Freedom Caucus will just come in and get the classified briefs about where this nation is, what our adversaries are doing in those areas, where these dollars need to be invested, I think that they will clearly see where the need is. I think another thing, too, that we have to do is we have to make sure that as authorizers, that we clearly define where we can create some savings, and those savings need to be reapplied within the defense budget. So we have to do that, because I understand the elements of folks that are focused on fiscal discipline, fiscal austerity, and I'm one of them. I want to make sure we're using our resources to the highest efficiency possible. So we need to do those things, and I think in doing that, in demonstrating that we're willing to look inward to determine where we can get efficiencies, and I believe that you'll be able to get the others to come along that are the fiscal hawks and say, hey, we have to just, cut across the board. So I think we make those two arguments, where the needs are, where the strategic needs are, what we can do internally to be more efficient, and I think we can get them on board. Sure.
Yes, sir. Can I throw out the last question, sir?
Sure, absolutely.
The dreaded red lights have come on.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Can you put into perspective the China spy balloon? You're probably the only congressional speaker we have today. Can you really just kind of lay out, what does this mean for the psyche of the American people, and does that connect the threat to China the way you see it?
Well, it does. The spy balloon really, I think, brought to the forefront in people's minds the depth of the threat from China. I think it was through the years, it was like it's across the Pacific, we don't see anything here, but this brought it home when somebody saw the spy balloon there, and allowing it to fly completely across the United States. I think, too, everybody has a different mindset about what the threat was from that balloon. Some folks have said, well, it could have been a different platform that could have, provided another threat. It could have been some sort of biological weapon, some sort of nuclear weapon. To me, the most compelling problem that I see from that is not what it was collecting in signals intelligence. And we know, listen, a platform at that level can do more than a satellite. But what was most problematic to me was not deciding to take the platform down when it came into territorial waters over the Aleutians, because we had known where it began and where it was at that particular point. What the Chinese were doing, I think, is not just trying to gather intelligence, but they're probing. And the Chinese are very good at this. They're probing to see what is the reaction from the United States. And when the Pentagon says, oh, don't worry about it, we hid everything, we made sure they couldn't see anything, that's exactly what the Chinese wanted to see. They wanted to see, what was the United States' reaction when this balloon went over? What did they now move? What did they look to try to hide? That gives them a window into how we would react if that platform was indeed a threat to the United States. So I think that was problematic. To me, the clear signal to China would have been, if it comes in our territorial waters, it's down. And if you notice, it was definitely a spy balloon. It was very maneuverable. If you watch where it maneuvered as it went over the middle portion of the United States, as soon as it was discovered, and by the way, it was a citizen that discovered it and said, by the way, there's a balloon up there, it's got a big platform on it, and it looks like CCP writing on the side. What is this? If you watched, as soon as it made the headlines, what happened to that platform? It made a beeline to the East Coast. So I think there are problems with that. And then subsequent to that, I think the reaction was a little bit to the other extreme. We're up there shooting down whatever those unknown objects were, hobby balloons, whatever they may be, and then using very expensive munitions to do that. I think that also begs the question about what needs to go on. We have to look at how we look at all threats. Because normally our folks that are looking at the radar screen are looking for things that go very fast and things that have a certain profile. This has opened up, I think, also folks in the military's mindset. But I think the most important thing is it's demonstrated to the United States what China will do, and that does put the United States directly at risk. So it brings that threat right to our shores.
Well spoken, sir.
Sure, thanks.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Thank you.